Now, last section of this presentation is about noises, insulation, and neighbors within the Japanese context. So we'll talk about building constructions a little bit in Japan and sound insulation. What are the cultural expectations when it comes to sounds you can make inside your own home? And how can you minimize being bothered by sounds from outside? And how can you make sure the neighbors don't complain about you making too much noise? Um, yes. So in Japan, houses are not built to last 100 years, but built to be destroyed every 30 years or so. This means that most houses and many apartment buildings in Japan are made of thin wooden structures and have generally poor insulation with often single pane windows. These windows don't offer, and the walls don't offer a lot of insulation against coldness and heat, but also against noises. We say Japanese homes are often have wallpaper, paper wall, because you can literally hear your neighbors' every movement. Not quite, but sometimes it is really bad. It's like you're living with the neighbors. Recent buildings made of reinforced concrete have much better insulation for both heat, cold, and noise, and often have very thick double pane windows that insulate against noises quite well, especially if it's beside a highway. But if you're beside a highway and your home will be filled with noise anyway as soon as you open the windows, right? By the way, a tip from my mother, who used to be a real estate agent. If you're wondering how many panes or layers your window has, you can put the flame near the glass and count how many times the flame is reflected. So the reflection will tell you how many panes your panes, how many windows they have. Right? Paradoxically, so the walls don't insulate very well, but at the same time, Japanese culture expected to respect boundaries. It's very important, and that means not only you shouldn't stare at people in the streets and in social situation, but the expectation is that they don't want to see you or hear you, even when you are in your own home. And this is why you may find out that friends or colleagues are always video chatting with you from a nearby cafe or restaurants, not from inside their own home. They may watch TV with headphones or put the volume to barely audible. They may never invite you over for drinks or dinner. And that is why you mostly and that's also why most likely you will find two sets of railings for curtains in your rental, so that you should add two layers of curtain, one light and translucent for the daytime, and a thicker, darker one for the evening, so that people never see you inside your home. So how to minimize noises from outside if you're someone who needs to work and needs quiet. This is probably fairly obvious, but for those who are not familiar with Japanese cities and how houses and buildings tend to be organized in Japan, especially if you're renting something before arriving to Japan, be careful and make sure to confirm the location to avoid being just beside a busy highway or train line. Know that many nurseries, since they have no yard, will bring the children every morning to a nearby park. It's not super noisy, but if you want absolute quietness, near park is not the best spot. Same with schools, obviously, and areas with active nightlife. Next, for the building itself, try to look for recently built concrete buildings and make sure they have double pane windows. A house may be good also if in a quiet area, but and also there's some distance with the neighbor. Sometimes the house is stuck together. To be safer, at least if you don't have children, you can try to rent on an upper floor so that you have less risk of having noises over your head. But also, if it's higher up, it will be farther away from the street noise too. Now, how to avoid getting your neighbors complaining about your family being too noisy. So I've seen many people receiving complaints from neighbors because of that. As I said, in Japanese culture, there's very little tolerance for noises, even for things you would assume is normal in other cultures, like noises for repairs, noise of crying children, and so on. These are not 100% complaint proof, but it's a start. If you like quiet, you may really enjoy this part about Japan, actually. The trains are a heaven of blissful silence, so you can take a nap on your way to work. But if you're the kind of person who tend to have a strong voice, like to laugh very loud, like me, invite friends over a lot, or you are a family with young children, this part can be quite stressful. So these are other things you can do for there are other things you can do for sure, but here are my basic recommendations. Again, this should be insightful for those who are not used to living in Japan yet and not aware of the customs around noises in Japan. First, I would choose carefully where I live. Concrete building, oh, it's so much nicer if you have children to live in a building with concrete walls and concrete floor that is well insulated. It really protects better against noises from outside, but also noise from your home. So you can be at ease with watching TV and chatting online or on the phone in these kind of apartment too. And if you have young children, choosing the right neighborhood can be essential too, by the way. If you have a neighborhood that is, no other children, sometimes it can be nice because, if it's a neighborhood with a lot of elderly people, they're so happy to see the children sometimes, depending on how noisy they are, of course. Um, Something to consider if you have young children, you can consider also renting on the ground floor. The disadvantage on the ground floor is that it tend to be colder, so you might have to add against those kind of foam tile to get the better insulation on the floor. But at least if the kids are running around, it won't make noise on somebody's head. Right? So the ground floor in Japan is the first floor. It's called the first floor. Um, And then, of course, wherever you live, remember the Japanese neighbors probably don't want to see or hear you from inside your home. Some people say there's this unspoken rule of 7 to 7, or maybe it's 8 to 8 in Japan, which means you should be particularly quiet between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. And this, whether it's a weekday or a weekend, which you can imagine makes it difficult to invite friends over. But there are loads of wonderful and interesting restaurants, cafe, and izakaya, Japanese pub, where you can meet and get noisy. It's very easy to go out in Japan and relatively cheap compared to other countries like Canada, the US, and the UK, since there's no tax added to the price you see and you don't need to give any tip. It's it's less nice if you're the one working at these places, though, because the salary is also quite low. Sorry.